Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the air feels thick, the streets feel alive in all the wrong ways, and the simple idea of being clean is, well, a bit of a luxury you're not going to enjoy. You find yourself waking up in a dim, cold room, wrapped in rough fabric that hasn't seen fresh water in quite some time. And before you even sit up, you already know you probably won't survive this, not because of some dramatic battle or royal betrayal, but because of something far more ordinary and far more uncomfortable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from and what your local time is. It's always fascinating to see where in the world people are drifting off with these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes slowly, and the first thing you notice isn't what you see, it's what you smell. It's not one smell, it's layers. A sour dampness clings to the air, mixed with something earthy, something stale, and something you can't quite identify but immediately wish you could escape. You instinctively wrinkle your nose, but there's nowhere to go. This is normal here. This is everyday life. You sit up on your straw-filled mattress, and it shifts beneath you with a faint crunching sound. That's not a comforting detail, but you decide not to think too hard about what might be inside it. Spoiler alert, you wouldn't like the answer. As you stand, your bare feet touch the cold floor, and you realize quickly that cleanliness, as you understand it, doesn't really exist here. Not in the way you're used to. Hygiene in the medieval world is less about staying clean and more about managing the dirt. Now, historically speaking, it's a common misconception that medieval people never bathed at all. In reality, many people did bathe, just not very often, and certainly not in the way you might expect. Public bathhouses existed in many European towns, especially earlier in the Middle Ages, and some people would visit them occasionally. But over time, attitudes began to shift, and here's where things get a little strange. You see, many people believed that water, especially hot water, could actually be dangerous. The idea was that bathing opened up the pores of your skin, making your body more vulnerable to disease. So instead of washing away illness, they feared they might be inviting it in. Historians still argue whether this belief was widespread across all regions or more common in certain areas. But the effect is clear. Regular bathing slowly became less popular, especially in later medieval periods. So as you stand there stretching in your same set of clothes you've likely worn for days, maybe even weeks, you begin to understand something important. Cleanliness here isn't ignored because people didn't care. It's because their understanding of health was completely different. You take a step toward the small window, hoping for fresh air. But what drifts in doesn't exactly help. Outside, the town is already waking up. You can hear distant voices, the clatter of carts, maybe even the faint sound of animals. And underneath it all, there's that same underlying scent. Life here is close. People live tightly packed together, often sharing small spaces with family members, sometimes even animals. Ventilation is poor. Waste disposal is, let's just say, not well organized. And yet, this is normal. You glance down at your hands. They're not visibly filthy, but they don't feel clean either. There's a slight stickiness, a faint residue of daily life that never quite goes away. You might wipe them on your tunic out of habit, but that doesn't really solve anything. It just spreads things around. Clothing, by the way, is another interesting piece of this puzzle. Most people don't have many outfits. In fact, a single set of clothes might be worn day after day. Washing them is a time-consuming process that requires effort, resources, and access to water, none of which are always convenient. So instead, clothes are aired out, brushed off, maybe shaken a bit, and that's considered good enough. You step outside, and the street greets you with a mix of movement and, well, more smells. A cart rolls past you, its wooden wheels creaking loudly. Someone nearby tosses something out of a window. It lands with a wet thud somewhere out of sight. You don't need to investigate to know what it was. This, too, is part of daily life. Quirky as it may sound, in some towns, people would shout warnings like, "Look out below," before dumping waste into the street. Not always, of course, but the idea itself tells you everything you need to know about how common this practice was. You take a careful step forward, watching where you place your feet. The ground is uneven, and not just because of stones. There's a constant need to stay aware, to navigate not just the physical space, but everything that comes with it. And still, people go about their day. They talk, they laugh, they work. To them, this isn't shocking, it's just life. Which makes you wonder, how quickly would you get used to it? Because that's the real challenge here. It's not just about enduring the dirt, the smells, the discomfort. It's about accepting it as normal. You pass by a group of people gathered near a small stall. Food is being prepared, bread, maybe some stew, and while it smells better than the rest of the street, you can't help but notice the lack of what you'd call hygiene. Hands move from surface to surface. Ingredients are handled without much thought, and yet no one seems concerned. This is simply how things are done, and as you continue walking, you begin to feel it not just physically, but mentally. A slow adjustment, a quiet realization that your modern expectations don't really apply here. You might miss the simple things. Running water, fresh clothes, the feeling of being truly clean. But here, those things are rare, inconsistent, or misunderstood, and so you move forward, taking it all in, step by step, breath by breath. Try not to think too hard about what you're breathing in, because this is just the beginning. The deeper you go into this world, the more you'll realize that what you once considered basic was actually a luxury. You step a little farther into the waking town, still adjusting to the constant background of smells and sounds, when something else begins to settle into your thoughts. It's not just that people aren't clean, it's that many of them are actively avoiding what you'd consider the most obvious solution: water. At first, that idea feels almost impossible to accept. Water is everywhere in your mind. Showers, sinks, washing machines. It's the default answer to dirt. But here, in this medieval world, water isn't always seen as something safe. In fact, for many people, it's something to be cautious about. You pause near a wooden well, where a few townsfolk are gathering with buckets. The water they draw is precious. It's used for drinking, cooking, and essential tasks. But even then, it's not always clean. Wells can become contaminated, rivers carry waste from upstream, and there's no filtration system quietly doing its job in the background. So people learn to be careful. A mainstream historical fact is that during much of the medieval period, access to clean, reliable water sources was inconsistent, especially in crowded towns. Without proper sanitation systems, water could easily become polluted, sometimes spreading disease rather than preventing it. And that's where the fear begins to make sense. You watch as someone fills a bucket, then carefully carries it away, not wasting a single drop. There's no sense of using it casually. No one is thinking about long, relaxing baths or daily washing routines, because water isn't just limited, it's unpredictable. And then there's the belief, quiet, persistent, and surprisingly influential, that bathing might actually make things worse. The idea goes like this. Your skin has tiny openings, pores that aren't visible, but are very real. When you soak in hot water, those pores open up, and if the air around you is filled with invisible, bad vapors, which many people believed it was, then those harmful elements could enter your body more easily. So instead of protecting yourself, you might be exposing yourself. Historians still argue whether this belief came mainly from medical traditions passed down from ancient scholars, or from observations of people falling ill after visiting bathhouses. But either way, it shaped behavior in a big way. You begin to see the result of that thinking everywhere. People might wash their hands occasionally, especially before eating, but full body washing? That's far less common than you'd expect. Instead, there's a focus on staying dry clean, if that makes sense, brushing off dirt, changing underlayers when possible, and avoiding anything that might disturb the body's balance. It's a completely different way of thinking about hygiene. You walk past a small group of people talking quietly, and one of them mentions illness. You don't catch all the details, but you hear enough to understand the general idea. Sickness isn't seen as something caused by germs, because the concept of germs doesn't exist yet. Instead, many believe in something called miasma, the idea that bad smells carry disease, which ironically isn't entirely wrong, but also not quite right. So if a place smells bad, it's considered dangerous. And if water might open your body to those bad smells, then avoiding it suddenly feels like a logical choice. Quirky as it sounds, some people would even carry small bundles of herbs or flowers to hold near their noses, believing that pleasant scents could protect them from illness. Imagine walking around with a portable air freshener as a form of medical defense. You continue down the street, passing a narrow alley where water trickles slowly along the ground. It doesn't look clean. In fact, it looks like it's carrying more than just water, and that's another part of the problem. Waste disposal systems are minimal at best. In many towns, refuse including human waste is dumped into streets or nearby waterways. Over time, those same waterways might still be used for washing clothes or even, in some cases, for drinking. It's a cycle that doesn't exactly support good hygiene, and yet people adapt. They rely on what they know. They follow traditions, beliefs, and practical limitations, and within that system, their choices make sense, even if they feel completely foreign to you. You find yourself near a larger building, its wooden sign swinging gently above the entrance. It looks like it might have once been a bathhouse. And that's interesting, because bathhouses were actually quite popular in earlier medieval periods, especially in certain regions. They weren't just places to get clean, they were social spaces, places to relax, talk, and even conduct business. But over time, many of them began to disappear. Some historians suggest it was due to growing concerns about morality, as bathhouses sometimes developed reputations that went beyond simple bathing. Others point to disease outbreaks, where crowded, warm environments may have contributed to the spread of illness. Either way, the result is the same. Fewer places to bathe, more reasons to avoid it, and slowly, a culture that shifts away from regular washing. You lean slightly against a wooden post, taking all of this in. It's not just about dirt or smell anymore. It's about understanding how an entire society can view something so basic in a completely different way. Water, in your world, is comfort. Here, it's caution. You rub your hands together absent-mindedly, still aware of that faint, persistent feeling of not being entirely clean. But now, you hesitate. Would you even want to wash them the way you're used to? With what water? From where? And at what risk? These questions don't have easy answers here, and that's the part that slowly sinks in. Hygiene in the medieval world isn't just limited. It's uncertain. You take a deep breath, though you're not entirely sure that was a good idea, and step back into the flow of the town. Because this is only one piece of the puzzle. If water isn't the solution, then what exactly did people do to stay clean? That answer, as you're about to discover, is just as unusual. You keep walking, still turning over the strange idea that water, something so simple, so obvious, could be seen as risky. And yet, here you are, surrounded by people who live with that belief every single day. So if bathing isn't regular, or even encouraged in some cases, what actually happens when people do decide to wash? The answer is less frequent, less comfortable, and far less glamorous than anything you might imagine. You find yourself inside a modest home, guided more by curiosity than comfort. The interior is dim, lit by a small window and the faint glow of a fire. There's no bathroom, no designated space that resembles what you'd expect, just a few wooden items, a bench, and a large basin sitting off to the side. And that basin is about as close as it gets. In many medieval households, especially among common people, bathing wasn't about stepping into a tub filled with steaming water. It was more like assembling the idea of a bath, piece by piece. Water had to be fetched, carried, heated, and then carefully poured into a basin or a wooden tub if the household even had one. A mainstream historical fact is that full immersion bathing was relatively rare for the average person, mainly because of how much effort it required. Heating enough water for a proper bath could take hours, and fuel like firewood was not something you wasted lightly. So instead, what you often get is partial washing. You dip a cloth into warm water, wring it out, and wipe down parts of your body. Arms, face, maybe your neck. It's more about maintaining a basic level of cleanliness than achieving anything close to what you'd call fresh. And even that might not happen daily. You watch as someone kneels beside the basin, slowly washing their hands and face with deliberate care. There's no rush. Every bit of water matters. Every movement is intentional. It's almost meditative if you ignore the context. Because here's the thing, this kind of washing isn't about luxury. It's about necessity. You glance toward a corner where a wooden tub sits unused. It's large enough for a person, but is empty. And it might stay that way for quite some time. Full baths were often reserved for special occasions, seasonal routines, or moments when cleanliness became particularly important, like before a religious event or after certain types of work. Some people might bathe more frequently than others, depending on their status or access to resources. Wealthier individuals could afford larger tubs, more water, and servants to handle the process, but even then it wasn't an everyday habit. Quirky as it may sound, there's a long-standing myth that entire families used the same bathwater, starting with the father, then moving down the household until the water became less than appealing. While this idea is often exaggerated, it does reflect a truth. Water was reused more often than you'd probably be comfortable with. You can't help but imagine it for a second and immediately decide that maybe not imagining it is better. As you move closer to the fire, you feel the warmth against your skin. It's comforting, especially in a world where cold seems to seep into everything: stone walls, wooden floors, even the air itself. And that brings up another reason bathing isn't as common as you'd expect: cold. Medieval buildings, especially for common people, aren't well insulated. Heating a space is difficult, and stepping into water, warm or not, can quickly turn into an unpleasant experience once you step out. So people avoid it, not because they don't care, but because it's uncomfortable, time-consuming, and sometimes even seen as risky. Historians still argue whether the decline in bathing during certain periods was more influenced by fear of disease or simply by practical challenges like cost and climate. Most likely, it was a mix of both. You sit down on the edge of the bench, watching the small routine unfold. There's something oddly calm about it, despite everything. The slow movements, the quiet focus, the simplicity of it all. It's not clean in the modern sense, but it's enough for them. And that's what matters here. You run your hand along your arm, feeling the faint layer of dust and sweat that seems to linger no matter what. It's not overwhelming, but it's constant, a reminder that cleanliness here is always partial, always temporary. You begin to understand that hygiene in this world isn't about eliminating dirt. It's about managing it, keeping it at a level that's tolerable, livable, because removing it completely, that's not really an option. Outside, you hear the faint sounds of the town continuing its day. Life doesn't pause for bathing routines. Work still needs to be done, food still needs to be prepared, and time is always moving forward. So people adapt. They do what they can with what they have. And over time, that becomes the standard. You stand up again, taking one last look at the basin, the cloth, the small effort that represents clean in this world. It's humbling, in a way, because it reminds you just how much of your own comfort depends on things you rarely think about. Running water, hot showers, clean towels. Here, those things are distant ideas, almost unimaginable luxuries. And as you step back outside, rejoining the narrow streets and the steady rhythm of medieval life, you realize something quietly unsettling. You're starting to get used to it. Not completely, not comfortably, but enough that it doesn't shock you the way it did before, which might be the most surprising part of all, because the deeper you go into this world, the more normal it begins to feel. And that's when the real questions start. If bathing is limited, then what exactly are people using to clean themselves? Because water, as you've seen, is only part of the story. You step back out into the narrow street, still thinking about that small basin, that careful use of water, and how something so basic has already become complicated. Because if water is limited, and full bathing is rare, then the obvious question quietly settles into your mind: what exactly are people using to get clean? The answer, like most things here, is a mix of creativity, limitation, and just a little bit of improvisation. You notice a woman standing near a doorway, rubbing her hands together with something that doesn't quite look like soap, as you know it. It's dull in color, slightly rough in texture, and definitely not the smooth, scented bar you might be imagining. This is soap, or at least something close to it. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval soap did exist, and it was often made from a combination of animal fats and ashes. The ashes provided a substance called lye, which, when mixed with fat, created a basic cleaning material. It worked, sort of. You move a little closer, curious, and catch a faint scent. Not exactly pleasant, but not unbearable either. Early soaps weren't designed to smell good, they were functional, and even that functionality was limited. These soaps didn't lather much. They didn't leave your skin feeling soft or refreshed. If anything, They could be harsh, sometimes leaving skin dry or irritated, so people didn't use them all the time. Instead, they relied on a combination of small habits and simple tools. Cloths, for example, were essential. You see someone dipping a cloth into a bucket of water, then scrubbing their hands with steady, practiced motions. It's not about foam or bubbles, it's about friction, wiping away what you can, as best as you can. And then there are the more unusual methods. Quirky as it may sound, some people use things like sand or fine ash to help scrub dirt from their skin. The rough texture helped remove grime, almost like an early version of exfoliation, though probably not the relaxing spa treatment you're picturing. You imagine rubbing sand on your hands for a moment, and immediately feel less enthusiastic about the idea. But here, it's practical, it's available, and it works well enough. You continue walking, passing a small market stall where various goods are laid out. Cloth, tools, bits of food, and occasionally small blocks of that same rough soap. It's not something everyone can afford regularly, but it's there. A quiet reminder that cleanliness, even in this limited form, still matters. Because despite everything, people do care about hygiene, just differently. You pause as someone nearby adjusts their clothing, shaking out a sleeve and brushing off visible dust. It's a small gesture, but it tells you something important. Cleanliness here isn't about perfection, it's about presentation. Looking reasonably clean, even if you're not. And that idea extends beyond just the body. You notice how people pay attention to visible areas, their hands, their faces, their outer clothing. These are the parts others see, the parts that matter socially. What's hidden beneath? That's less of a concern. Historians still argue whether this focus on outward cleanliness was driven more by social expectations or by practical limitations, but either way, it shapes how people approach hygiene. You run your fingers along your sleeve, feeling the rough fabric, the faint build-up of daily wear. It's not unbearable, but it's noticeable, and it doesn't really go away, because without frequent washing, everything accumulates, slowly, quietly, until it becomes part of the background. You glance at your hands again, considering the idea of using that rough soap or even sand. It's not ideal, but in this world, it's one of the better options available. So you try it. Carefully, you take a small amount of the coarse soap, rub it between your hands, and feel the slight resistance as it spreads. There's no rich lather, no satisfying foam, just a thin, gritty layer that you work into your skin. You rinse with a small amount of water, watching it carry away some of the dirt. Some, not all, but enough to feel slightly better. And that's the key word here, slightly, because complete cleanliness isn't the goal. Improvement is. You dry your hands on your tunic, not because it's clean, but because it's what's available, and take a slow breath. It's a strange adjustment, lowering your expectations, accepting that good enough really is good enough. You continue down the street, passing more people engaged in their daily routines, each one managing their own version of hygiene in small, practical ways. A quick wipe, a brush of dust, a rinse when possible. It's not perfect, but it's consistent, and over time, that consistency becomes normal. You begin to notice that the idea of being completely clean, truly fresh, like stepping out of the modern shower, isn't just rare. It's almost irrelevant. Because no one expects it, no one is aiming for it. The standard is different. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you start to adjust to that standard. The smells don't feel as overwhelming. The textures don't feel as uncomfortable. It's not that things have improved. It's that your perception has shifted. And that's what makes this world so fascinating and so unsettling, because it shows how flexible our idea of normal really is. You take one last look at the small piece of soap in your hand before setting it down. It's simple, rough, imperfect, but here, it's enough. And as you step forward again, blending into the steady rhythm of medieval life, you realize that this is just one layer of the story. Because if keeping your body clean is already this complicated, then what about everything else? Like the clothes you wear every single day, without much chance to wash them. You glance down at your clothes again, really noticing them this time, not just the rough fabric or the simple stitching, but the way they feel against your skin. There's a weight to them. Not heavy in the sense of armor or thick layers, but a kind of lived-in heaviness. A quiet build-up of days, maybe weeks of wear. The fabric holds on to everything: dust from the road, smoke from fires, the faint traces of sweat that never quite wash away. And the more you think about it, the more you realize something important. These clothes aren't getting washed anytime soon. In your world, changing clothes is routine. Laundry happens almost automatically, quietly, in the background of life. But here, in this medieval setting, washing clothes is a full task, one that requires time, effort, and resources that aren't always available. A mainstream historical fact is that laundering clothes in the Middle Ages was labor-intensive and often done infrequently, especially for common people. It involved soaking garments in water, sometimes mixed with lye or urine to help break down stains, then scrubbing, rinsing, and drying, often in open air. Yes, urine. It sounds strange, but it was actually used because of its ammonia content, which can help clean fabrics. Not exactly the fresh-scented detergent you're used to. You pause for a moment, letting that detail settle, and then gently decide not to dwell on it too much. Because here, it's practical. You watch as someone nearby shakes out a tunic, sending a faint cloud of dust into the air. It's not being washed, it's being refreshed, in the simplest way possible. That's the first line of defense: shaking, brushing, airing things out. You might hang your clothes outside for a while, letting the wind carry away some of the smell, maybe leave them near a fire, so the smoke masks anything unpleasant. It's not cleaning in the true sense. It's maintenance. And for many people, that's all they can manage. You run your hand along your sleeve again, noticing how the fabric feels slightly stiff in places, softer in others. It tells a story of movement, of work, of time passing without much interruption. And then there's the issue of quantity. Most people don't have wardrobes filled with options. In fact, many own only a few sets of clothing, sometimes just one main outfit for daily use, and perhaps another for special occasions. So even if you wanted to change into something fresh, there might not be anything available. You wear what you have, day after day, layer after layer, and over time, those layers become part of you. Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages were more tolerant of odors because they were constantly exposed to them, or if they simply didn't notice them the same way modern people would. It's likely a bit of both, because when something is always present, it stops standing out. It becomes background. You notice a small detail as someone walks past you, the subtle scent of smoke clinging to their clothes. It's not unpleasant exactly. In fact, compared to everything else, it might even seem comforting. And that's another interesting point. Smoke was often used almost like a natural deodorizer. Clothes hung near fires would absorb the scent, masking other odors. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it helped. Quirky as it may sound, in some cases people valued the smell of smoke or herbs in their clothing because it suggested a level of care, even if the garment itself hadn't been washed recently. You take a deep breath and catch a mix of scents: fabric, smoke, earth, and something faintly sour underneath it all. It's layered, complex, and strangely consistent. You begin to understand that clothing here isn't just about appearance, it's about function, protection from the cold, a barrier between your skin and the world, and in some ways a shield against the realities of daily life. You shift slightly, feeling the fabric move with you, and realize how different this is from what you're used to. There's no crisp freshness, no sense of new. Everything feels used, familiar, worn in, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different. You watch as someone carefully folds a piece of cloth, placing it aside with a level of care that suggests it's important, because it is. Clothing takes time to make. It requires materials, skill, effort, so you don't treat it casually. You don't wash it unless you have to. You preserve it, extend its life as much as possible, and that means accepting a certain level of imperfection. You brush a bit of dust from your shoulder, more out of habit than necessity, and continue walking. The street feels a little more familiar now. The sounds, the smells, the textures, they're still noticeable, but they don't hit you as strongly as before. You're adapting, slowly, quietly, and maybe that's the most surprising part of all, because what once felt overwhelming is starting to feel manageable, not comfortable, not ideal, but manageable. And as you move through the flow of people, each one carrying their own version of daily life, on their backs quite literally, You realize that clothing is just one more piece of this larger picture, a picture where cleanliness isn't absolute, where freshness is temporary, and where everything, from your skin to your clothes, carries the marks of the world around you. You take one last glance at your sleeve before letting your hand fall to your side. It's not clean, but it's yours. And in this world, that's enough. At least for now, because as you're about to discover, managing your clothes is one thing, but dealing with something far more unavoidable is another entirely. Like what happens when nature calls, you continue walking, still adjusting to the quiet acceptance of dust, fabric, and the slow build-up of daily life, when suddenly a much more immediate reality makes itself known. Nature doesn't wait, and in this medieval world, answering that call is not exactly a comfortable experience. You slow your steps as you notice a small stone structure built along the side of a larger building. At first glance, it looks unremarkable, but as you get closer, there's a certain smell sharp, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. This is where things happen, and it's nothing like what you're used to. A mainstream historical fact is that many castles and larger buildings used a system called a garde-robe, a simple toilet structure built into the wall. Waste would drop through a vertical shaft, often landing in a pit below or sometimes directly into a moat or nearby ditch. Efficient, in a very basic sense, but not exactly pleasant. You step cautiously inside a narrow chamber where a simple wooden seat sits over an opening. There's no flushing mechanism, no running water, just gravity doing all the work. And the smell? It lingers. Even if the waste falls away, the air doesn't forget. You quickly understand why these spaces were often placed near outer walls or in corners of buildings, anything to keep them slightly removed from living areas. Historians still argue whether medieval sanitation systems were more advanced than we give them credit for, especially in certain well-designed castles and monasteries. Some locations did attempt drainage systems or flowing water to carry waste away, but for most people it was much simpler than that, and much less clean. You step back outside, taking a breath of relatively fresher air, and realize that castles aren't the only places dealing with this problem. In towns and villages, things are even more direct. You walk down a narrow street and notice something you've been trying not to think about. Chamber pots, small containers kept inside homes, used during the night or when going outside, isn't convenient. They're practical, necessary, but they come with a routine, and that routine often involves emptying them somewhere outside. Quirky as it may sound, it was common in many places for people to simply toss the contents into the street. Sometimes with a warning shout, sometimes without. You instinctively glance upward for a moment just in case. Because here, awareness isn't just helpful, it's essential. You step carefully, watching where you walk. The ground isn't just uneven, it's unpredictable. And while some towns had basic efforts to manage waste, like designated dumping areas or early drainage systems, many simply didn't, which means everything mixes together. Rainwater, mud, waste, all blending into a kind of ever-present layer that becomes part of the environment. You notice how people move through it with practiced ease. They know where to step, where to avoid, how to navigate without thinking too much about it. It's second nature. And that's what makes it feel even more surreal, because what feels shocking to you feels normal to them. You pass by a group of workers digging a shallow trench alongside of the road. It's not a sewer system in the modern sense, but it serves a purpose guiding waste and water away from main pathways. It's simple, imperfect, but better than nothing. You pause for a moment, watching as water slowly trickles through the trench, carrying with it bits of debris you'd rather not identify too closely. And you begin to understand something important. Sanitation here isn't about elimination. It's about movement, keeping things flowing, even if that flow isn't particularly clean. You take a step back, giving yourself a little distance, and notice a nearby building with a slightly different setup. A small wooden extension juts out from the side, with a narrow opening beneath it. Another form of toilet, this time slightly elevated. Waste drops down and stays there until it's removed. Eventually, maybe, depending on who's responsible. Historians still debate how regularly waste pits were cleaned in different regions, but it's clear that maintenance wasn't always consistent, which means build-up was common. And build-up leads to smell, to insects, to all the things you've been quietly trying not to think about. You rub your hands together again, not because they're particularly dirty at the moment, but because the idea of cleanliness feels more distant with each passing step. It's not just about personal hygiene anymore, it's about environment, because no matter how careful you are, you're surrounded by systems that aren't designed to keep things clean. They're designed to cope, to manage, to survive. You continue walking, noticing how daily life continues around you without interruption. People talk, trade, laugh, argue, all while stepping around the same realities you're still trying to process. It's just part of the world. And slowly, you begin to see how everything connects. Limited bathing, rough cleaning methods, infrequently washed clothes, and now sanitation systems that are more about necessity than comfort. It all adds up, layer by layer, until it becomes the baseline. You take a deep breath carefully this time and let it out slowly, because at this point it's not about avoiding discomfort. It's about understanding it, accepting that this is how things work here, and realizing that what you once thought of as basic hygiene is actually a complex system of compromises. You glance back one last time at the narrow street, the trenches, the small structures tucked into corners. It's not pretty. It's not pleasant. But it's real. And as you turn forward again, continuing deeper into this medieval world, one thought quietly lingers in your mind. If the systems for dealing with waste are this limited, then what does that mean for the streets themselves? Because everything has to go somewhere, and you're about to find out exactly where. You take a few more careful steps forward, already a little wiser about where not to step, and yet the street ahead doesn't exactly make things easier. If anything, it raises more questions, because now that you've seen where waste starts, you begin to notice where it ends up. Right here, all around you. The road beneath your feet isn't really a road in the modern sense. It's a shifting surface-packed dirt mixed with straw, scraps, ash, and everything else that gets thrown or washed into it. You pause watching a cart roll by, its wooden wheels pressing deep grooves into the soft ground. Those grooves fill quickly with water, with mud, with whatever happens to be nearby. And nothing here stays clean for long. A mainstream historical fact is that many medieval towns lacked proper sewer systems, especially in earlier periods. Waste disposal often relied on open gutters running along the sides of streets, designed to carry away rainwater and refuse. In theory, it sounds organized. In practice, it's messy. You glance toward one of these gutters, a shallow channel carved along the edge of the road. A thin stream of murky liquid moves slowly through it, carrying bits of debris along its path. It's not rushing, it's not fresh, it's just moving. And that movement is enough to keep things from completely piling up in one place. You step over it carefully, trying not to think too hard about what's flowing beneath you. But the smell rises gently anyway, not overpowering, but persistent. It's the kind of smell that doesn't demand attention, it just stays with you. You notice how people navigate around it without hesitation. They've learned the patterns, the slightly drier patches, the safer stepping stones, the subtle differences in color that signal where not to go. It's a kind of unspoken map, and you're still learning how to read it. Historians still argue whether medieval streets were as filthy as often portrayed, or if some towns maintained a higher level of cleanliness through local regulations and community effort. In certain places, there were indeed rules about waste disposal, and even designated cleaning days. But enforcement? That's another story, because rules only work when people follow them. And here, survival and convenience often take priority. You watch as someone casually empties a small bucket into the gutter, the contents blending almost instantly with what's already there. There's no ceremony, no hesitation, just routine. Quirky as it may sound, some towns employed individuals whose job it was to clear waste from the street's early forms of sanitation workers. They would shovel, scrape, and remove build-up when it became too much. But this wasn't a daily service, and it wasn't always thorough. So between those efforts, the streets lived their own lives. You continue walking, noticing how the texture underfoot changes from one area to another. Some patches are firmer, more compacted. Others are soft, almost sponge-like. You instinctively choose the firmer ground, even without fully understanding why. A faint squelch from somewhere behind you confirms that you made the right choice. You don't turn around. Better not to know. Instead, you focus on the rhythm of the place, the sounds of footsteps, the creak of carts, the distant chatter of people going about their day. Life continues, even here. And that's what makes it so strangely fascinating. Because despite everything, the smells, the textures, the constant need to watch where you step, this isn't a place of discomfort for the people who live in it. It's just home. You pass by a small group gathered near a doorway, talking and laughing as if nothing unusual surrounds them. Their clothes carry the same layered scents you've begun to recognize. Their shoes are worn but steady, built for exactly this kind of terrain. They belong here. And slowly, in a quiet, almost unnoticed way, you're starting to feel less like an outsider. You adjust. You step forward carefully, your eyes now instinctively scanning the ground before each footfall. What once looked like an ordinary street has slowly revealed itself to be something far more complicated. Because here, the street isn't just a place to walk, it's where everything ends up. You notice it first in the texture beneath your feet. It's not just dirt. It's a layered surface mud mixed with straw, bits of food, animal droppings, and everything else that daily life produces and discards. And it doesn't get cleaned in the way you might expect. The mainstream historical fact is that medieval streets, especially in crowded towns, were often used as open dumping grounds for waste. Household refuse, animal remains, and even human waste could end up right outside people's doors, particularly in areas without organized sanitation systems. You pause for a moment, letting that sink in. This isn't accidental, it's routine. You watch as someone casually tosses a small bundle of scraps into the street. No hesitation, no second thought. It lands with a soft thud, quickly blending into everything else, and life continues. You step around it, adjusting your path slightly, just as everyone else does. There's an unspoken understanding. Here, an awareness of where to walk, how to move, how to avoid the worst of it. It's like a quiet choreography, one that everyone learns early. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were truly as filthy as they're often portrayed, or if certain regulations like fines for dumping waste in specific areas helped maintain some level of order. In some cities, there were indeed rules about cleanliness, but rules and reality don't always match. You glance down a narrow alleyway and notice a darker, wetter patch of ground. Water or something like it slowly trickles along the side, carrying bits of debris with it. This is drainage, not underground pipes, not hidden systems, just gravity and open space. And when it rains, everything shifts. The streets become slick, the layers loosen, and what was once settled gets stirred up again. It doesn't wash away completely, it just moves, spreads, redistributes. You take a careful step forward, feeling the ground give slightly beneath your weight, and quickly adjust your balance. It's not dangerous exactly, but it's unpredictable. You notice animals moving through the same space, dogs, chickens, maybe even a pig, wandering freely. They don't avoid the mess, they add to it. Quirky as it sounds, pigs were sometimes allowed to roam city streets because they could consume waste, acting as a kind of living cleanup crew. Of course, this also meant they contributed their own additions to the environment. It's a cycle, a very visible one. You watch as a cart rolls by, its wooden wheels cutting through the soft ground, leaving behind deep tracks that quickly fill with whatever moisture is present. And just like that, the surface changes again, always shifting, always adapting. You begin to understand why footwear here is so important. Thick soles, sturdy construction, anything to create a barrier between you and the ground beneath. Because that ground isn't just earth, it's history. Layer upon layer of daily life, compressed into something you can walk on but not ignore. You take a breath a little more cautiously now, and notice how the air carries hints of everything around you. It's not overwhelming anymore, but it's persistent. Always there. You pass by a doorway where someone is sweeping debris from inside their home, directly into the street. It's not careless, it's practical. Inside stays cleaner, outside absorbs the rest. And when everyone does the same thing, the street becomes the collection point for an entire community. You pause again, this time noticing a slightly raised walkway along one side. It's not much, just a bit of elevation, but it makes a difference. Drier, safer, cleaner, relatively speaking. These small design choices matter. They're subtle attempts to manage a system that isn't fully controlled. Historians still debate how effective these measures were, but it's clear that people were aware of the problem and tried, in their own ways, to deal with it. Even if the solutions weren't perfect, you continue walking, your steps more confident now, your movements more aligned with the rhythm of the place. You're not reacting as strongly as before, you're adapting. And that's the strange part, because what once felt shocking is slowly becoming expected. You know to watch your step, to avoid certain areas, to read the ground like a map. It's a skill, one you didn't think you'd need. You glance ahead and see a small group of people gathered near a well. The area around it looks slightly cleaner, more maintained. That makes sense. Water sources are important. They need to be protected, at least to some degree. Because even in a world where waste is everywhere, there are still boundaries, still priorities. You approach slowly, noticing how people take care not to contaminate the area directly. There's a kind of respect here, recognition that some things must remain usable. It's not perfect, but it's intentional. You stop a short distance away, taking in the scene, the movement, the quiet balance between necessity and effort, and you realize something subtle but important. This world isn't careless. It's constrained. People aren't ignoring cleanliness. They're working within limits. Limited water, limited systems, limited understanding of what causes illness. So they do what they can, and what they can do looks very different from what you're used to. You take one last look down at the street beneath your feet. It's still messy, still layered, still far from clean, but it makes sense now, in its own way. And as you lift your gaze and continue forward, one thought gently settles in your mind. If the streets are this complex, then the places where people eat and prepare food must have their own challenges too, because cleanliness doesn't suddenly improve just because you step indoors, and you're about to find out exactly how that plays out. You step inside slowly, hoping for some kind of relief from what you just left behind, and at first it almost feels like you've found it. The ground is firmer here, the air is slightly warmer, the noise of the street dulls into a soft background murmur, but then your senses begin to adjust. And you realize the difference isn't as big as you thought. The room you've entered is a kitchen or something close to it. A central hearth glows with low, steady heat, its smoke curling upward toward a ceiling that isn't quite designed to handle it. There's no chimney in the modern sense, just an opening somewhere above, letting some of the smoke escape. The rest lingers. It clings to the wooden beams, darkening them over time. It settles into the air, mixing with every other scent in the room, food, ash, dampness, and something faintly sour. You blink a few times, letting your eyes adjust. A mainstream historical fact is that many medieval homes relied on open hearths for cooking and heating, often without proper ventilation. Smoke would accumulate indoors, leading to soot-covered walls and long-term respiratory discomfort. You can feel that already. Not painfully, just persistently. Like something that never quite goes away. You step closer, watching as food is prepared in simple, repetitive motions. A pot hangs over the fire, its contents slowly bubbling. You can't immediately tell what's inside. That's part of the point. Stews are common here because they allow everything to be combined grains, vegetables, bits of meat when available. It's efficient, it's practical, and it stretches resources. But it also means that ingredients aren't always fresh in the way you'd expect. You notice a small table nearby where food is being cut. There's no clear separation between raw and cooked items. No visible system of sanitation between tasks. Just hands, tools, and habit. And those hands have been everywhere. From the street, from the animals, from daily tasks that don't involve washing in the way you're used to. You glance around, looking for something familiar. Maybe a basin, some soap, a cloth used for cleaning. There is water, but it's limited and is not necessarily clean. Historians still argue whether people in medieval times fully understood the connection between cleanliness and disease. But it's widely accepted that germ theory as you know it simply didn't exist. Without that understanding, many hygiene practices were based on tradition, not science. So what you see here isn't neglect. It's normal. You watch as someone stirs the pot, then wipes their hands on a cloth that's already been used multiple times. The cloth isn't dirty by their standards, just used, reused. It hangs nearby, ready for the next task. You shift your weight slightly, noticing the floor beneath you. It's cleaner than the street, yes, but not by a wide margin. Bits of food have fallen and been stepped on. Ash from the fire spreads outward in uneven patterns, and in the corners, movement. Small, quick, almost invisible unless you're looking for it. Rodents. They don't dominate the space, but they're here, quietly existing alongside everything else. A quirky but real detail is that medieval kitchens often attracted mice and rats due to constant food availability, and complete prevention was nearly impossible. Cats were commonly kept not as pets, but as essential pest control. You glance around, half expect